Welcome to another session or uh, another architecture of reality. As we go through this one, it's been interesting to get some feedback and have some questions. And one of the things that uh, surprised me, or I hadn't really thought about, is some feedback and conversations that I had about uh, a recent session where we talked about the overlapping spheres of authority that are established in the world, and I realized that some people were hearing when I said overlapping spheres, they were hearing overlapping circles, or they were imagining overlapping circles. We don't always get a lot of opportunities to exercise our imagination and thinking in three dimensions, and so people were interpreting overlapping spheres as sort of circles on a page that overlapped some. Um, when when you talk about the overlapping spheres of authority, what you're talking about is spheres inside one another. So if you think like Russian nesting dolls, overlapping spheres, and I was talking about how that comes from astronomy, and I realized that this is one of the important things that I think we sometimes forget about the older educational system, or maybe the older way of thinking about the world, that was developed out of liberal arts education, where liberal arts education was considered the beginning of education, versus now we have the most of America. We get what was developed in Prussia, the educational system that was developed out of Prussia in the 1800s, when they lost to Napoleon. They said, we need to raise up better soldiers. Our soldiers aren't good at hearing orders and taking them. And so we sort of switched our American system in the early 1900s to more of a Prussian system. So instead of the goal being freedom of thought in our education, the goal is the ability to do what you're told, or something like that. Well, the liberal arts education was about freeing your mind from being able to be manipulated easily, because you exercised your imagination on the art of words and on the art of numbers. The art of words being grammar, logic, rhetoric. You learned how words mean, how to use words well, and construct sentences well, so that you could hear and understand accurately and communicate accurately. You studied logic, understanding the relationship between words, the relationship between concepts, and to be able to understand when the logic is clear is clear and good, and when you're dealing with logical inconsistencies, logical errors. And rhetoric, the art of being able to communicate truth beautifully so that you can share the truth that you know, and then also to be able to take in truth that's being communicated to you. You understand how truth is communicated, and what pitfalls there are in that make us prone to manipulation, and so that you can avoid being manipulated, but instead actually find truth, right? So the art of words has to do with finding truth, and then the art of numbers has to do with the ability uh, to describe and eventually manipulate well for the service of your neighbor, manipulate the world that you find. So arithmetic, the art of numbers; geometry, the art of numbers extended into space; music, which is music and astronomy, or cosmology, or the last two, and music and cosmology. Those two are, with the addition of time into the equation. So music is arithmetic worked out in time harmoniously in terms of harmonies and understanding arithmetic, but it's also arithmetic as heard. So it's taken in by the ear. And then cosmology, which is geometry extended into time, right? So geometry is numbers extended into space, but then cosmology or astronomy is numbers extended into time. They're moving, right? Time isn't itself a thing. Time is the measure of the measure of change. So time itself isn't a thing, but as things change over through time, as they move and change, we can measure it in time. And music and astronomy are arithmetic and geometry added with the addition of time to them. And when you start studying, in geometry, you uh, may begin to study things in 3 dimensions, but we often don't get very far imaginatively in terms of exercising our imagination of thinking in 3 dimensions in geometry. But in astronomy, everything's in 3 dimensions. So you really have to uh, learn to expand the sort of imaginative space in your mind from 2 dimensions out to 3 dimensions in studying astronomy. And the when serious philosophical study of organization of mankind in different institutions, as soon as you start in on that, you learn really quickly if you read older sources, older writers, Thomas Aquinas, Boethius, if Aristotle, Plato, hopefully, obviously, that you read something like the Timaeus, you realize, or the Republic, you realize really quickly that when you start dealing with how how institutions are organized with groups of people, that you actually need your imagination to be able to extend out into 3 dimensions to think about those sorts of philosophical questions, or what is it that we're trying to do when we organize an institution in mankind? How do we do that well? Well, the exercise that your mind gets in studying astronomy gives you some of the categories necessary to understand the older thinkers. So sphere sovereignty is an example of one of those things. Often, because we don't have that practice, when we start thinking about sphere sovereignty, we think more in terms of overlapping circles. You've got maybe 3 circles of the uh, the family, the authority of the family, and then the authority of the state and the authority of the church. Those are the 3 um, fundamental institutions in as you start talking through institutional thought, or in philosophy of politics. Well, when you think in 2 dimensions, then you put yourself there in the middle where the 3 overlap. You're thinking that it's a matter of competition about who has the most authority over me, which institution gets the most authority, and then is the self's authority the primary, and we get to choose which institutions we allow to have authority over us, in thinking in that 2 dimensional way. But the sphere sovereignty is more like Russian nesting dolls, where you've got spheres that wrap around a person, spheres of authority that. So when you say overlapping spheres of authority, it's not overlapping circles, it's nested spheres, like Russian nesting dolls, where the spheres of authority um, fit over one another. So when they are meant to bring checks and balances to one another, the way God arranged the world, you've got different spheres of authority over the same place at the same time, the same person at the same time, and there's intended the same society at the same time, and they're intended to bring checks and balances to one another. So as one of them gets out of line, there are other authorities in the world that can hold back the authority that's becoming tyranny, whether it's a family or a church or a state. When a tyranny is pressing onto an individual, then there are other there are other spheres of authority in our life that can push back. Now, this is also the intended way that America is supposed to be set up, where you've got county authorities, you've got state authorities, you've got federal authorities, you've got three different federal authorities, each that are sphere authorities. They're nested over and around the same society, and they're intended to be checks and balances on one another. And it's really hard to this is a difficult concept for us because we have completely equated authority and power, right? Authority is the ability in most of our minds, the ability to tell people to do something they don't want to do, right? But that's actually not authority. That is power, right? But power and authority are not equated in the understanding of sphere sovereignty, right? You might have the authority over someone, but you don't have the that doesn't mean that God has told you that you have to exercise the power to make somebody do something, right? You might be responsible, but you don't have you aren't given the power to make somebody do something. Whereas you have somebody else who's in authority who has, because they are good at their job and because they're trustworthy and because the people under their authority trust them, they can get people to do what they want because the hearts of those people are towards the authority, right? And so but pure but post um, post Machiavelli, the word real or realist actually is a pure equation of power and authority because there is no longer, well, because Machiavelli introduces the idea that that society is formed by the power that is exercised on it, right? That there isn't a an ontological nature. There isn't a form that the society is, and then the authority is a part of that form. Instead, power is exercised, and so society forms into that shape, and that power and authority become the same thing in a realist social metaphysic, is the best way to put it, right? We call it realpolitik often, right? That really it just comes down to power and who has it and who can exercise it and who can't exercise the power means they don't really have the authority, those sorts of things. So we're not submitting to a world that we find, right? The world is created by the power, where the power is held, and then it's just a debate about who has the power to tell people to do things they don't want to do. That's it's a two-dimensional way of approaching things, but it's also it's a nihilist metaphysic. It is the belief that things don't have a proper shape, but that the shape is formed from pressures outside of a thing, things don't have a proper shape. So, but without the mental exercise of astronomy and studying um, harmonies in music, the arithmetic in practice of harmonies in music and understanding those sorts of things. It's we often actually don't have the imaginative space to be able to uh, um, understand what would it look like if these things were different than they are. A book that I've really enjoyed and recommend. It's not an easy book, but Wooden Books has done an amazing job of putting books like this, the Quadrivium, back into circulation, back into publication, where they take classic liberal arts texts and reprint them. And it's a book that really, I mean, even just the little book of coincidences, which is they tack on to the end of this about the coincidences of physics, the coincidences that you discover when studying the physics of the world. It's an incredible book. It's mind blowing in a lot of ways, but it's also helpful in giving you new imaginative categories or giving your imagination exercise, the kind of exercise it needs to be able to imagine beyond what we find in the present, and makes us much more difficult to control and manipulate. So that is something